It's Tuesday, November 25th, 2008, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville. Produced and distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C., this is your NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about our show at our website, stash.norml.org, and continue the education and conversation on our blog as well. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. The podcasting and blogging technology for the NORML Daily Audio Stash is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. For your professional web design needs, visit redaphid.com. Good day, Stashers. Welcome to the podcast. The whole marijuana law reform community is still reeling in the aftermath of the Mensch decision from the California Supreme Court. We're sorting out what the new decision means for the caregivers and providers in the state of California. And joining us today is NORML Legal Committee member and co-author of Proposition 215, Bill Panzer, who's going to tell us a little bit of his interpretation of what this means for cooperatives, collectives, dispensaries, and caregivers in the state of California. We're also joined today by Alan St. Pierre, the executive director of NORML, who's here in a two-part interview that will begin today and conclude tomorrow, discussing the recent appointments to the cabinet by President-elect Barack Obama. In a word, it doesn't look too good for drug law reform, but we'll get Alan's take on that right after our hemp headlines. We're gearing up for Thanksgiving Thursday. We've got plenty of turkey and football on the TV, and a really nice bunch of, shall we say, herbal Thanksgiving treats. We hope your Thanksgiving holiday is a good one and remind you that there will be no stash on Thursday or Friday while I'm up visiting my family. All right, Stashers, there's a lot to get to, so let's get to it. Load up your double-barrel bong and enjoy your NORML Daily Audio Stash.
Hello, I'm Paul Stanford from the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation, or THCF. Medical marijuana is legal in 13 states today, and THCF has clinics in 8 of those states. Our doctors help qualified patients obtain an authorization for medical marijuana in their state. Patients are eligible for medical marijuana with a history of either severe chronic pain and or nausea, cancer, AIDS or HIV, hepatitis, glaucoma, seizure disorders like epilepsy, chronic muscle spasms such as in multiple sclerosis or asthma, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, and gastrointestinal disorders like IBS or Crohn's disease. If you or someone you know has one of these conditions, our doctors will help you obtain a permit for medical marijuana. THCF Medical Clinics has offices in Washington State, Oregon, California, Colorado, Hawaii, Nevada, Montana, and now Michigan. Call 1-800-723-0188 or go to the web at hemp.org or 1-800-723-0188.
Now it's time to take a look at the latest stories about marijuana from news organizations across America and around the world in our NORML Daily Audio Stash, Hemp Headlines. Whizzinator makers plead guilty to conspiracy in federal court. The owners of the company that made the Whizzinator, a prosthetic penis used to mask illegal drugs in urine, pleaded guilty in federal court today to 2 counts of conspiracy. Gerald Wills, the president of Puck Technology, based in Signal Hill, California, and Robert D. Catalano, the vice president, were charged by criminal complaint last month with selling 2 masking products, the Whizzinator and Number 1. Both were sold through their websites. As part of the investigation, there were 2 undercover purchases of the products on September 8, 2006 and February 7, 2007. Mr. Catalano and Mr. Wills pleaded guilty to conspiracy to sell drug paraphernalia and conspiracy to defraud the United States government. Puck Technology also pleaded guilty to the same charges. The company has stopped operating. But the demand for methods to beat drug testing will not stop. Manufacturers will now just have to package and sell fake penises that pee drug-free urine more subtly. Other than Alabama, off the top of my head, I can't think of any states that ban the sale of fake penises. I also don't think selling someone else's drug-free urine is a crime. Surgical tubing and those gel-pack stadium hand warmers are still legal. Can't you see someone clever selling all those items unassembled in a package at an adult sex shop? Maybe with a big warning label that reads, "Warning! False penis, freeze-dried urine, warming gel packs, and surgical tubing are for sexual purposes by adults only. Do not attempt to use these products for any other purpose." You think that's a bit loony? Then you don't know the history of winemaking during alcohol prohibition. Congress allowed Americans to possess liquors in one's private dwelling, as long as it was really your home. No funny business with warehouses, and the liquor was really for you and your guests. Just to make sure that the home sippers were safe, Congress tacked on another protection. No search warrant shall issue to search any private dwelling unless it is being used for the unlawful sale of intoxicating liquor. In short, possessing alcohol was illegal, except at home, and the law promised never to break in on you there. In one final bit of constituent service, the California wine industry won a clause permitting home manufacture of non-intoxicating cider and fruit juices exclusively for use at home. The winemakers soon began shipping barrels of grape juice with large and prominent labels along the following lines.
Warning! The Department of Agriculture tests have determined that the contents will turn into wine of 12% alcohol if permitted to sit for 60 days.
That left home beer makers outside the law, while home vintners got a broad legislative wink. They could legally buy wine-making kits. When the grape juice fermented, they could legally possess at home. And the law could not bang down the door if they served it to friends and family. British House of Lords to vote on harsher cannabis prohibition. From BBC News. Peers are being urged to overturn the government's plan to upgrade cannabis from a Class C to a Class B drug. The change is due to come in force in January, reversing Tony Blair's 2004 downgrading and raising a maximum jail sentence for possession to 5 years. This is despite the Council on the Misuse of Drugs recommendation that cannabis should remain a Class C drug. The government's reclassification order was made in October, but is not due to come into force until 26 January next year. A letter to the Guardian newspaper, signed by former government chief scientific advisors David King and Lord Robert May, says the drugs classification system must be credible and that changing it again would give an ambiguous message. Quote, "Cannabis use has fallen in recent years, especially following its downgrading to Class C in 2004, and it is obviously unwise to risk reversing that trend." End quote. Home Secretary Jackie Smith said in June that the drug should return to Class B because of uncertainty over its impact on mental health. This would lift the maximum prison sentence for possession from 2 years to 5 years. Home Secretary Jackie Smith needs to review the latest research on cannabis and mental health. Researchers in Denmark have found no validity to the idea of cannabis-induced psychosis and concluded that schizophrenics whose bad reaction to pot preceded their mental illness would have developed schizophrenia whether or not they used cannabis. Since the UK downgraded cannabis from Class B to Class C, they've seen cannabis use drop to the lowest levels in a decade. So, naturally, in the face of such success, they've decided to go back to Class B. Much of this change can be traced to the UK media hyping the threat of skunk. Here in America, they call it bud or pot 2.0, but the argument is the same. This new super pot is nothing like what you smoked at Woodstock. It's addictive and will ruin your kids' lives. It's not true, of course. There has always been super potent pot, and potency is irrelevant. If it's more potent, you just smoke less of it. Increased potency does not change the effects of cannabis. You still get high, but it just takes less smoking to get there, which is a good thing if you don't like smoky lungs. Wouldn't it be nice if drug policy was based on science and medical observation instead of tabloid headlines and ignorant politicians? Dutch cities to grow their own cannabis. From the Telegraph, UK. The Grow Your Own idea has taken hold in Eindhoven, while Tilburg City Council has said it is considering starting up a cannabis market garden of its own to supply local coffee shops. Others are expected to follow suit as the Dutch government considers nationalizing soft drugs production and sales in a bid to decriminalize the industry. 40 mayors met at the weekend, with many in favor of legalizing soft drugs, whose consumption is a major tourist draw for Holland. Amsterdam's Lord Mayor, Job Cohen, said that he was in full support of the country's cannabis-selling coffee shops, as their survival would help to keep the trade out of the hands of criminals. However, he told the Telegraph that the Eindhoven City Council's plan to start an experiment involving the council actually growing cannabis for supply to coffee shops was going a, quote, little too far, end quote. He said that he would prefer to see a form of cannabis license granted to potential growers who would be carefully monitored by police. Cohen said, quote, "While I don't agree with the idea of councillors actually growing cannabis in plots near their town halls, a positive development has been that our government has now said it will take a close look at the issue of where the cannabis should come from. We could see the problem of the two doors, legal front door for customers, illegal back door for supplies, being resolved soon," end quote. Wow, I'm just trying to imagine mayors and city councils here in America discussing where to begin planting the municipal cannabis garden. Well, I mean, imagine it in present-day America, not colonial America where hemp plantation was required by law, and not post-revolutionary America where hemp fields supplied the rope and the sails for old Ironsides, and not pioneer America where hemp fields supplied the canvas for the covered wagons, and not World War II America where Hemp for Victory supplied the greatest generation with the hemp materials they needed to win 2 wars. I mean present-day America.
Hello, Chicago!
Barack Obama has been elected the 44th President of the United States. But will he bring us, the cannabis community, the change we can believe in?
It's an issue of doctors prescribing medical marijuana. I think that should be appropriate.
NORML is asking you to take action and help us hold President-elect Obama to his word with our $10,000 pro-cannabis law reform ad contest.
When I was a kid, I inhaled frequently. That was the point.
Just make a 30 or 60-second video or flash animation that answers the question, what should President Obama do about pot? You can submit as many entries as you like, and winning videos will be featured on NORML's website and television campaigns.
What I'm not going to be doing is using Justice Department resources to try to circumvent state laws on this issue.
The grand prize is $3,500, so enter early and enter often.
Well, I would not punish doctors if it's prescribed. That may require some changes in federal law.
Contest deadline is January 15th, 2009. Check NORML.org for official contest rules.
The war on drugs has been a utter failure, and I think that we need to rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws.
President Obama, we couldn't agree more. Tuesday is our look at your government at work here at the Audio Stash. While the inevitable re-legalization of cannabis hemp will have to happen at the federal level, the steps leading to that destination take place at the state and municipal levels. We focus in on the initiatives, bills, and amendments regarding cannabis across all 50 states, and what activists like you are doing to enact a positive reform to our cruel and outdated marijuana laws.
Body dies, the ego cries, the birds they sing, the creatures again. It's an honest day's work.
If you're working hard to make an impact in your city and state, please email us at stash@normal.org and let's share your local efforts with the worldwide cannabis community. Together, we can affect our government at work.
Afternoon pollution rises high into the sky. How can we still deny the truth?
We're still measuring the effects from the California Supreme Court decision in the Mensch case, which just broke recently. And joining us here to discuss it further is Bill Panzer, who's a member of the NORML Legal Committee and Board of Directors, as well as one of the co-authors of California's Prop 215. So, Bill, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's nice to be on.
So let's just break down again, give our listeners a quick rundown of what this decision means. What did the court decide here in California?
Well, the issue in People v. Mensch was how do you qualify as a caregiver? Under Prop 215, the only legal transference of cannabis from one person to another where both sides were protected was from the caregiver to the patient. Since then, SB 420, or the Medical Marijuana Program Act, has come out and allowed for patient collectives, which is another model. One patient in a collective can physically transfer it to another. But the question in Mensch is, how do you qualify as a caregiver? Caregiver is defined in the statute as the individual designated by the patient who has consistently assumed responsibility for the patient's health, housing, or safety. And the critical question came, if you consistently provide the medical cannabis to the patient, does that alone qualify you as caregiver? A trial court had said no. The Court of Appeals had overruled that and said yes, if you consistently provide the cannabis, you can be caregiver. And that was in front of the Supreme Court, State Supreme Court, for 2 years. And then this morning they came out with the decision that says no, that does not qualify you as caregiver. You have to qualify as caregiver prior to any marijuana entering the equation.
So how will this decision affect the hundreds of medical marijuana dispensaries in the state of California?
Well, to the extent that there are dispensaries that pretend to operate on a caregiver-patient model, where it's owned by an individual who claims to be the caregiver for the patients, clearly they will not have the protection of that statute. Not that they arguably had it before, but clearly now they do not. For those dispensaries that are patient-owned and run and set up as a cooperative or collective, this decision really will have very little effect on them, other than their caregiver members, people who have joined as a caregiver for another patient, will now look at whether or not they actually qualify as caregiver for that patient, and therefore whether that would make them eligible to be a member of the collective.
Is there any reliable estimate as to how many of these dispensaries are co-ops versus individuals?
It's tough. I haven't seen any real survey done, but my own estimate would put roughly, at least 75% of them in the illegal owner-owned category.
Okay. Now, I know that in California things kind of go on a county-by-county basis. Do you feel that this ruling is going to embolden those counties that are against medical marijuana, like San Diego or San Bernardino, to go further in prosecuting dispensaries and patients?
Well, it makes it easier, but those counties basically have shut down the dispensaries there anyway. I think where you might see some effect here would be in a couple of areas. One, areas where the local authorities just weren't clear on what the law allowed or didn't allow, so they kind of let it happen. Now they'll have more clarification of what they can and cannot allow. And then also areas where there are a lot, like in Los Angeles, for instance, it may embolden authorities there to crack down. I think, short term, you will see some reaction. Long term, I think the writing is on the wall that, an owner-run dispensary selling cannabis, even medically for a profit, those days are numbered.
Okay, so would that be then the primary effect on just the individual patients in California? It's going to be tougher to get their supply of medicine?
I don't think so. I mean, if you really look at it, the supply ultimately comes from the black market anyway. I mean, even a collective of patients that's cultivating for their own need, they have to get the seeds or the baby plant somewhere.
Yeah.
And under the law, seeds and baby plants are every bit as much cannabis as finished bud is.
Yeah, that's a good point. So how about people that want to, protect themselves here under this model of cooperatives? How should they go about doing that?
Well, collective is more informal. Cooperative is actually a corporation. It's a type of corporation in California called a cooperative corporation. For a, fairly substantial sized dispensary or storefront, I recommend that, in fact, you do incorporate as a cooperative corporation. There's rules, a board of directors. You can have all the membership vote, or the board of directors can be self-appointing. There's different ways to set it up. But the idea behind a collective or cooperative is that after all the expenses are paid, and the salaries are paid, and the medicine's paid for, and the bills are paid, etc., if there's any money left over, it belongs to everybody equally. It's not going in the pocket of the guy running the dispensary.
Oh, okay. Now, I'm no lawyer, but as I was reading this Mensch decision, it seemed like part of their test here, as far as the caregiving, was that the caregiving was on a consistent basis, and it took place even before the use of marijuana came into the equation. So, how are the cooperatives then protected under that kind of test? Do they offer?
The cooperative is okay. Again, there's two completely different models under which one human being can legally, physically hand cannabis to another human being. Model 1, caregiver to patient. Model 2, completely separate and different. One member of a collective or cooperative to another member of a collective or cooperative. They're two different animals.
Okay.
Okay? So a dispensary set up as a collective or cooperative, this doesn't affect it other than under the rules of collectives and cooperatives. Who can join a collective or cooperative? In order to be a member, you either have to be a patient or a caregiver. So, for example, if there's a collective and I'm caregiver for my wife, I can join the collective as her caregiver because I'm allowed to possess and transport cannabis on her behalf.
Right.
Now, the only place where it might affect it is if there are caregiver members of a dispensary who really don't qualify as caregiver. For instance, let's say instead of caregiver for my wife, for whom I do consistently provide assumed responsibility for health, housing, and or safety. In her case, health, housing, and safety. Mm-hmm. Supposing I have a friend that the only thing I do for him is I provide him with the cannabis consistently. And going on the lower court decision, I assume that I could be a caregiver. I join a collective as a caregiver. Now, with this decision, I don't qualify as my friend's caregiver.
Right.
Because all I'm doing is providing cannabis. I'm not doing anything else. Therefore, since I'm not his caregiver, I'm not a lawful caregiver, and therefore now I lawfully can't be a member of a collective or cooperative.
Right. I guess this was...
understand that. It's a little confusing.
Yeah, I was going to say, it opens up a lot of confusing questions. I guess where I was getting at is if you're a part of the collective and a caregiver for your wife, you're not a caregiver for anyone else in that collective?
No. I'm
Right.
only a caregiver for my wife.
Okay. Wow, it's a lot of stuff we're going to have to iron out in the wake of this decision, and we'll keep looking to our experts here on the NORML Legal Committee to break it down as best as we can understand it here. And Bill Panzer, thanks for joining us here on the Daily Audio Stash.
You're very welcome.
I'm Alan St. Pierre, Executive Director of NORML. Have you heard about the new super pot that's supposedly 20 times more potent than your father's Woodstock weed? Don't believe the hype. Marijuana's THC potency has always varied, even in the 60s and 70s. And the drug czar's numbers are full of, well, exaggerations. While no intoxicant is harmless, cannabis is non-toxic and far safer than alcohol. No matter how much you smoke, of whatever potency, you cannot die of a marijuana overdose. Potency is irrelevant anyway. More potent pot just means you smoke less of it, meaning less harmful smoke in your lungs. This is a prime example of harm reduction in action. Besides, the government already allows the prescription of THC pills. Its commercial brand name is Marinol, and it's 100% potent. Meanwhile, the federal government won't allow dying people to use natural marijuana, no matter what the potency? Does this make sense to you? Learn the facts about pot. Visit NORML.org today.
Here at the NORML Daily Audio Stash, we work hard to change our nation's marijuana laws through education and discussion. But we also take time to relax and unwind with an eclectic mix of pod-safe music from many independent artists. We look for music that speaks to the growing truth about cannabis, or music that speaks to broader themes of freedom, liberty, social justice, equality, and protest. To find out more about the artists and download the music you hear on this podcast, just log on to stash.norml.org. And if you'd like to get your music heard by the online cannabis community, just send us an email at stash@normal.org. Today we have a nice mellow track from Sean Hayes, a New York City-born, North Carolina-bred musician who grew up studying theater before he turned to playing guitar. That sounds a lot like how my brother got started playing music. Well, except for the New York City or North Carolina parts. While I don't think Smoking Signals is particularly about the herb, if you take a look at the cover art for the album, you just know that some kind of mind-altering substance was used in its making. Plus, if he's an actor and a musician, let's face it, there's no way that guy hasn't smoked weed before. It makes me think, though, what kind of smoking signals are there? I can only think of 3. The peace sign, the wave of your hand as you're coughing up a lung from the last bong hit, and the pinched forefinger and thumb gesture you make when you want to make sure that your friend doesn't bogart that joint going around the room. You can, of course, as always, check out more of Sean Hayes' music on his MySpace page or through his website. We have links to both on our blog, stash.normal.org. You can also pick up an MP3 download of this song. It's Sean Hayes with Smoking Signals.
Rocks, hammer, and some chains to tie my hands to boots, the dirt, some food, some land to dig it in. I cut the wood, tear down, build up for moving in. Hold a mud pipe, the gallon, getting in. Wash your hands and clean the floor. Get some money for the store. Move the papers on your desk. Breathe some air into your head. Pop the bubble, concrete feet will hold you here. Fall in the lake and then go fishing. Little bear, rest your bones upon the seashore. Salt tears, trade this lucky key the next time you are near. Stop that buzzing over there. Stretch your bones and wash your hair. Change strings, dust your wings. Sing a song, sharpen your sting. There's a baby in the bucket of my plastic dolls holding Mary. Enough. There are mermaids and they can't follow on the shore. There are hermits wet from swimming, drying all. Call the fly.
Hey, how's it going? My name's Will. I don't work at a used record store. I don't own an iguana, although I'm sure they make great pets. I don't have dreadlocks or play the acoustic guitar. I can remember quite well, thank you, and no, I don't constantly have the munchies. When 420 comes around, I've still got 40 minutes of work left. I've never hit a girl on a bike with my car or shot my friend with a shotgun. I've never had to apologize for letting a girl I was watching drown in a pool while I was getting high because, duh, I wouldn't be getting high if I was around children. I'm a regular guy who works regular jobs, just like the majority of all Americans who use marijuana occasionally and responsibly. My name is Will, and I'm normal.
We just had a very exciting election season and saw the election of President-elect Barack Obama, the 44th President of the United States. And also on the front of cannabis news, we saw 9 out of 10 cannabis-related initiatives pass in the election. So you'd think those of us in the drug law reform community would be excited about the change we can believe in. However, as President-elect Obama has begun to make his appointments for various positions within his cabinet, it has brought a lot of concern and consternation to those of us in the community. So speaking with us today is the Executive Director of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, Alan St. Pierre, from Washington, D.C. And Alan, welcome back to the show.
Good day, Russ.
So we've got your latest post from the NORML blog up here about the Obama appointments, and I guess we should just start with the one that would be the one that would affect those of us in the community the most, and that would be the drug czar, the head of the Office of National Drug Control Policy. What can you tell us about Obama's direction on this appointment?
Well, he has said that he would like to have a bipartisan cabinet, and that might just be one or two, shall we say, token Republicans. And if that's going to be the case, there can be no more token office in the cabinet than the drug czar's office. It's kind of ridiculous that it's even a cabinet office. It's kind of a throwaway, I think, in this case, for Obama to give it to a Republican. And so that leading Republican is former Congressman James Ramstad, who served Minnesota for many years, was a state legislator, and has a long, almost 30-year history of opposing almost every functional marijuana law reform out there, whether it was medical marijuana, decriminalization, even hemp. Even the Minnesota farmers haven't really been able to get him on board to recognize that Minnesota farmers, looking across the border to Canadian hemp farmers, should be able to do the same thing.
Okay, so the Jim Ramstad pick doesn't look very promising. Another pick that we'd have to look at concerning marijuana, and especially how we would treat medical marijuana in the 13 states that recognize it, would be the Attorney General, the top law enforcement officer in the nation, and Obama has tapped Eric Holder for that position. What do we know about Eric Holder?
Well, NORML and Mr. Holder mixed it up quite a bit in the 1990s when he was the prosecutor, the district prosecutor picked by the federal government here, because he was really against marijuana, and he sought to increase penalties quite a bit from a couple pounds of marijuana would usually not land you into a strong felony situation, whereas he believed very strongly that the numbers needed to go way, way down to qualify people for a felony in a city that is completely overridden with crime and hard drug abuse. So he was able to constantly cite the James Q. Wilson theory of broken windows, all based with, and Giuliani at that time was raising marijuana arrest rates from 2,000 per year in New York City to 58,000 arrests per year. So yeah. Holder thought it would make sense that the District of Columbia ride that wave of anti-marijuanaism. And as the second banana over at the Justice Department, we know that he was intimately involved with fighting medical marijuana initiatives, particularly out in California, trying to stop doctors from having the ability to communicate with their patients about medical marijuana. So, I mean, he's a very nice, very intelligent guy, but when it comes to cannabis law reform, it's hard to really look at anything in his history and say that he's been anything other than a drug warrior.
Well, the mandate for change comes from the people, and it comes from the top of the administration. We've spoken before about Obama's selection of Joe Biden for his vice president, and of course Joe Biden's history with the RAVE Act and mandatory minimum sentencing, and even in the creation of the Office of National Drug Control Policy. Another appointment at the top that's got us a little worried would be the White House Chief of Staff, and why don't we tell people a little about Rahm Emanuel?
Well, this is in some ways the scariest to me because, one, he's coming out of the Chicago school. Two, he's the chief of staff. People don't realize how powerful the chief of staff is in terms of dictating what's going to happen, typically at a domestic policy level, which is really where Rahm's specialty is. And when he was in the Clinton White House in the 90s, he was pretty much the top dog between Clinton and law enforcement, whether that was the Justice Department or the Drug Czar's office, and he was intimately involved with not only the policy making, but the political strategy making behind it. And those, in some ways, are quite independent tasks, and he has absolutely bought hook, line, and sinker into almost every absurd cannabis canard there is out there. Marijuana is a gateway drug. Marijuana causes criminality. Marijuana is not a medicine. Medicines can only be brought to market if they go through rigorous FDA testing, even though we don't allow marijuana to be FDA tested.
Right.
He is really unfortunate in the sense of he has such a long history of opposing reforms. And so some years ago, a prominent writer and author had an opportunity to interview him along with a whole bunch of other folks involved with drug policy reform and those who oppose it for, I believe it was a cover piece for the Rolling Stone back in the mid-90s, 97, I believe. And so the author came back from the meeting immediately to the NORML office, which is only about 3 blocks away from the Drug Czar's office, and shared with me his shorthand notes. And I thought, here we are, almost 15 years later, 10 years later at least, we can take a look at these notes now that Rahm is in power. And it is amazing and almost chilling to see how on point he was and how one can see those same points being recited over and over again, regardless of the administration, but really well articulated under Clinton. So he is, I guess the one area that I take some faith in is, or two. One is the boss. If the boss sets the agenda, this guy seems pretty good at following the agenda. He's a strong lieutenant, and if Obama wants to lead the way on either medical marijuana, such as he promised, on stopping the raids, or on possibly doing something different in the criminal justice system regarding something like decrim, well, I believe Rahm would probably move in that direction dutifully. However, if there's any equivocation and there's that sort of central democratic leadership leaning, such as many of the people around Obama has, then they will be very pragmatic on this topic and likely try to avoid it with a 10-foot pole. So the one area, though, that I do take some faith in, beyond the fact that the boss calls the shots, ultimately, is that after years of opposing the Hinchy-Rohrabacher amendment, which in Congress for the 4 or 5 years it was attempted, would have stopped the federal government from spending money in states that have medical marijuana from the DEA raiding them, that after years of opposing that, kind of equivocating, that the last time there was an actual floor vote, he voted in favor of it, meaning he wanted the DEA to stop those raids. And he did that, again, a couple of years now in advance of even joining the Obama team. So, maybe he saw the light. And the reason why I think so, and because he's such a political animal, is that if, as he does, he lives in Chicago, it would have been hard in the last 3 or 4 years to not have read the Chicago Times, Chicago Sun-Times, Chicago Tribune, all the major papers in that area, which I'm sure he and his staff consume every day, and not seen that the state legislature was looking at medical marijuana, that there weren't these incredibly sympathetic victims in the state of the prohibition laws, and that the polling, the little surveys, the things on the radio and the TV, as you know, Russ, they all break towards reform. They never, ever, on the topic of medical marijuana, break towards punishing patients. So, hey, he's not from Boston, where I am, in what I call the Tip O'Neill school of politics, but that is a maxim that works in big city politics and just about everywhere else, and I think he's paid attention that on the topic of medical marijuana, there can be some give.
Yeah, I that's what I keep trying to tell people, too. too, is to remember that it's not 1996. You know, we got a lot of these Clinton-era people coming in who were very anti-medical marijuana in 1996, but I think if anything, like you say, it's all up to the boss, and the direction comes from the boss. And what I read about Obama, everyone says he's a very practical and pragmatic coalition-building politician, and I think he doesn't want to lose any political capital on the issue. So I don't know if he'll spend any, but I don't think he can afford to look like he's attacking medical marijuana at this point. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree on the idea of not spending the political capital. Not only have I think we could read that in the tea leaves of the people he's putting around him, the huge economic and international issues such as 2 wars that he has before him, that we all, I think, pragmatically ourselves have to realize that we're pretty far down the line of priorities. However, we're also getting the buzz from the Democratic leadership side of the House, which is very much in power and very much in favor of medical marijuana. However, they too have bigger fish to fry and want to work with this new president. So I think many of us have to realize we just have to keep pushing hard. As somebody mentioned to me earlier today in an email, honey certainly works better than vinegar, and I hope my analyses comes off more as analyses than vinegar, because one of the things we see here is the hundreds and hundreds of emails we've received in the last 3 weeks since the election period, where so many folks, I think, sort of wrongly believe that by electing Obama, we're just a step away from practical medical marijuana laws and effective decriminalization of marijuana. And those of us who have been at this for, in this case, they're 18 years, Keith and NORML 38 years. We have gone through this before when these liberal administrations come in, many of whom we supported, we gave money to, we were involved in politically, and they're supportive of our issues, and then they get into power, and sometimes they've been helpful. Certainly Jimmy Carter's administration would be the very best example we've ever had where an executive branch, when they ran on decriminalization and talked about it, they actually stayed with the issue throughout their administration. When Clinton came, as I mentioned in the blog today, these folks literally lied to the faces of sick and dying medical marijuana patients, telling them they were going to get their medical marijuana. You know, that oft-used line, "I feel your pain," I delivered so many times to these patients, some of whom had gotten into the medical marijuana program, gone through every flaming hoop necessary over a 3 or 4 year period, and simply had never received the marijuana from the University of Mississippi at Oxford. And they confronted these gentlemen on the campaign trail in '92, and they said, hey, we understand. You're a perfect example of how we're going to fix government. And a year and a half later, they effectively killed the program, and none of those people ever saw a nanogram of marijuana. So again, presidents have huge plates in front of them, but let's hope that Obama, as a 47-year-old who smoked marijuana, who's been exposed to cocaine, and who knows what else, if he could be completely as honest and frank as he would probably like to be, it would be really great to see him move these individuals around him. I mean, kind of like the Nixon to China syndrome here, if you will. If this group of people around him get the walking orders to do something affirmative on medical marijuana, or for that matter, decriminalization, or hemp, then it would be so much quicker and effective in the legislative process if these individuals could be turned in that direction, because no one in the mainstream establishment, media, the courts, legislative branches, law enforcement, they would not look to these drug warriors in the same way that they do us reformers, and they would effectively, one imagine, have to engage in that level of change that's being brought to them. So we will see, but the people around him currently are all people who have a very long history of opposing reform, and we only now await the head of the DEA for that appointment, and again the proper announcement of who the head of the ONDCP is, though if I was a betting man, my money's probably on Jim Ramstad.
Thank you for downloading the NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. We are produced by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. Our executive producer is Alan St. Pierre. Our deputy director is Paul Armentano. Our webmaster is Brian Judy. And web production is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. As always, you can catch up on the latest information about marijuana at www.norml.org. And you can interact and download from our Audio Stash blog at stash.norml.org. For everyone here at NORML, I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville, hoping all your harvests are bountiful and your encounters with law enforcement are non-existent. We leave you today with another one of our cannabis quotes, this one from Roger Q. Mills, a senator from the late 1800s, who said, quote, "Prohibition comes to dissipate the sunlight of happiness, peace, and prosperity in which we are now living, and to fill our land with alienations, estrangements, and bitterness. It comes to bring us evil, only evil, and that continually. Let us rise in our might as one and overwhelm it with such indignation that we shall never hear of it again as long as grass grows and water runs." End quote. Now, he was talking about alcohol prohibition, but the concept still remains the same for cannabis prohibition. It is an evil, and it needs to end now. Help us at norml.org. You can join up today, and you can help promote the growing truth about cannabis. I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. We'll be back tomorrow with more news and interviews that you can use for the cannabis community. And until that time, take care of each other, tokers.